Welcome, everyone. This is Alfred Sanchez. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. We've got over 700 participants who are joining us. So give us a few minutes to make sure that everyone is in the room to joining our great discussion on Chamber Thursday Roundtable. So give us a few minutes. Those of you who are coming in, we've got about 250 folks already on. We are looking at maybe 700 folks who are going to be joining us, so bear with us. We'll get started on our Chamber Thursday Roundtable in just a few minutes. You can see the wonderful lineup we have today on an extremely important topic. So if you just bear with us for a few more minutes, let's wait until all of your friends and colleagues are in the room and we'll get started. Well, I see that Danielle Castro has already found our chat feature. That feature is there for you all to communicate with one another. We are just about 300 participants in the room. We're waiting for a few more. So bear with us, but please feel free to use the chat function to network and say hello to your colleagues. I'm sure all of us are dying after, I don't know, what is it, week 1 million? Of COVID to reach out and see and talk to friends again. So please go ahead and use that, and we'll get started in just a few minutes. Let's see, we are about 330, 340 folks. We're going to get started in just a minute or two. Guys, really want to thank everybody for joining us for another Chamber Thursday Roundtable. We've got a really great panel put together and some incredible discussion. We've got a wonderful report that's being unveiled today. So stay with us for a second. Please feel free to use the chat function to say hello to friends and make new connections. And we'll get started in just a minute or two. If I could have all the participants who have an open line to mute themselves, that'd be great. So that way it would well, we've got a lot of great friends joining us. We're just almost at 400, so I'm going to wait one more minute to get started, and then we'll go forward. But I do want to get a lot of people a chance to get in. We had over 700 registrations, so I know folks will be trickling in throughout. But let's give your friends and colleagues one more minute to get into the room. I know there's a huge traffic jam on the internet today, so hopefully everyone will find their way around it. All right. Well, it's 1:05, and it's time for another Thursday Chamber Roundtable. I'm Alfred Sanchez. I'm the president and CEO of the Greater Miami Chamber. And for weeks now, we've focused on top issues relating to how COVID-19 is impacting our community. Today, we're going to turn to the nonprofit sector. As many of you remember the annual report that the Miami Foundation used to put out on the state and growth of the nonprofit community in Greater Miami. Well, this past year, the Greater Miami Chamber's nonprofit committee undertook an initiative to convene numerous partners to revive that important report. Today, thanks to the tremendous leadership, sponsorship, and support of Wells Fargo, Philanthropy Miami, the Miami Foundation, the United Way, and many, many, many others, and with the research conducted by the George Perez Metropolitan Center at FIU in coordination with a lot of our friends out there. Today, we're going to unveil the results of that study. The philanthropic and nonprofit sector has always been an integral part of making communities strong, vibrant, and resilient. Over 100 years ago, the founders of our great community in Miami recognized that critical role that the nonprofits play in establishing a community that's vibrant and resilient. So they opened chapters and offices of some of the most stalwart nonprofits of the time to help them build a new American community in what was basically a wilderness in South Florida. The nonprofit sector in our country has historically done the heavy lifting when the government and other institutions could not. And in Miami for decades, it has been one of the fastest growing sectors of our economy. You can see that in the exponential growth of the arts and culture community, along with the expansion at a great rate and the preeminence of our medical arena. The burgeoning of our small town and the booming into a booming international metropolis has also brought huge metropolitan problems such as housing shortages, the accompanying homelessness, mental health and environmental issues, poverty, the need for quality childcare, and so many other issues. Addressing these challenges, finding solutions, has been driven in large part by the nonprofit and philanthropic efforts. These organizations are the driving force in improving the living standards and helping those who call Greater Miami home. Today, we have a really exciting program for you. We have it divided into 5 key pieces. First, we're going to welcome Stacy Palmer, the editor of the Chronicle of Philanthropy, a stalwart publication nationally, to frame the discussion within a national perspective. And we welcome Stacy all the way from Washington, D.C. Next, we're going to hear from the lead researcher and expert, Dr. Maria Ilcheva from the Jorge Perez Metropolitan Center at FIU. She's going to share the economic impact of the nonprofit sector, a snapshot that captured the most current data leading up to the COVID-19 pandemic. This report is going to be an important benchmark as we look towards the future. After learning a little bit about the key highlights of the report, we're going to hear from Christina Ratma, the board member in Philanthropy Miami, who's going to share the survey that the Metropolitan Center and Miami-Dade County just completed to get a current pulse of the sector reflecting the impact that the pandemic had on the nonprofit sector. And finally, we're going to round up our roundtable with a panel discussion moderated by Stephanie Silvestri, the Chief Program Officer at the Children's Trust. And she'll be joined by the Honorable Daniela Levine Cava, District 8 Miami-Dade County Commissioner, who, by the way, founded and ran for many, many years the Human Services Coalition, now known as Catalyst Miami. Maria Alonso, President and CEO of the United Way of Miami-Dade, and Patrick Morris, Vice President of Community Affairs for Wells Fargo. They will engage in a very, very important discussion looking forward through the COVID-19 crisis. Now, as a hallmark of our Thursday roundtables, your questions are always important. So we want to make sure that you get the answer to ask those burning questions, and let me then cover some of the house rules to make that discussion efficient. Everyone's going to be muted during the call. to submit a question, please submit it using the Q&A section. Only questions in the Q&A are going to be addressed by the speakers. So please, please, please use the Q&A for that. As I mentioned at the beginning, use the chat. It's there for your general comments, quick clarifications. If you want to communicate and network with others, that's what that's there for. So please use Q&A for questions and everything else for the chat. Also, keep an eye on the chat because we will be sharing links to the report, summary infographics, and other information there for you to be able to avail yourselves as we go forward. All right, so enough from me. Now let's begin the program by letting me introduce a very good friend, a colleague, Sherry Thompson Giordano, who's the Executive Director of the PACE Center for Girls and Chair of the Greater Miami Chamber's nonprofit business community. She's going to be moderating the day, and let me turn it over to you. Sherry?
Thank you, Alfred. Thank you so much, and thank you for the great introduction to today's call. I can tell you we're very excited about this session today. I'd like to take a moment to share with you that the Chamber's Nonprofit Business Committee has been discussing the need to evaluate the economic impact of the nonprofit sector for several years. Since the last analysis, as Alfred mentioned, we did as a community was done in 2006. This conversation began in our committee with Pat Morris as he was our committee chair, and this was something he really wanted to see to come through. So it's taken a few years, but we're here today and we're very excited. We were grateful to connect also with Philanthropy Miami as we learned that they too were on the same track, thinking about the need for this benchmark report. We thank Christina Radema and the principal of MK Consulting and the secretary of the board for her efforts, and we definitely thank Philanthropy Miami for their collaboration and financial commitment in helping make this report a reality. Together, with the leadership of Pat Morris and the major sponsorship of Wells Fargo, we were able to expand our partnership, and we want to thank our funding partners, the Children's Trust, Miami Foundation, United Way of Miami-Dade, SIMPACT, and the Center for Social Change. You all helped us make this report a possibility. We also want to give special thanks to Dan Wall, the Miami-Dade County Office of Grants Management, Israel Krebs from Krebs de Maria PR, and most certainly Dr. Maria Ichevi. She and her team, which were our research partners at the George M. Perez Metropolitan Center at FIU, for their excellent work and their team's commitment for this project. As a quick reminder to what Alfred just said, if you do have a developed question you would like surfaced to one of our panelists, please place us on the Q&A feature and not on the chat feature. Our only questions in the Q&A feature will be surfaced to our panelists. Links to the report and a summary infographic of the key findings are also going to be posted on the chat. Also will be forwarded to you who all attended today in the follow-up email. So now let's begin the program. We are delighted to welcome Stacy Palmer from her home right outside of Washington, D.C. She has served as top editor since the Chronicle of Philanthropy was founded in 1988 and has overseen the development of its website, its daily newsletter, and its webinar series. A nonprofit activist, she has been leading the voice of the sector for over 3 decades, sharing the pulse of the nonprofit world in print, of course, but also on radio and television. She has a unique vantage point and perspective about the sector. Having spoken to our philanthropic community in Miami many times in the past, we are so happy to hear her perspective today. And please welcome Stacy. Stacy.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to join you. And I'll tell you that one of my last business trips was to Miami, and I savor that constantly because it was such a lovely, lovely visit. And I had no idea at the time it would be one of the last times in the near future I get to do that. But I look forward to seeing all of you in person at other moments. And I will tell you that I really am impressed with the strength of Miami's nonprofit sector, having the vantage point of seeing places around the country. You really have a phenomenal group of people doing the work. And I want to say a thank you to all of the nonprofit executives, board members, volunteers, donors, all of you who have been helping during this tremendously difficult time. You aren't necessarily getting all of the attention that you deserve, and I just want to say a special, special thank you. You've been doing enormous amounts of work, keeping your own organizations running, protecting your colleagues, doing extraordinary things to keep our communities going. And we really hope that you can continue to do that work, and we're here to help you in every way possible. I would love if you have a question for me that you need some information. I'm always here to help. You can follow me on Twitter at Stacey Palmer and just tweet at me and I'll find an article for you or anything that you need. These have indeed been extraordinarily tough times for all kinds of nonprofits, to be sure, but we also see lots of signs of hope. So this is not going to be a doom and gloom talk. I do want to make sure that everyone understands, though, how fragile nonprofits are. We're all very, very worried that we are going to see a wave of closures of some nonprofits that don't have the reserves that they might have needed at this really difficult time. And I think over the next few months, we're going to see more and more nonprofits that are not going to be able to make it. Hopefully they'll be able to merge with other organizations, but we may see some rather major closures. So we need to all do everything we can to prevent that because these organizations are so vitally important. There was a study that came out today that talked about the museum world and said that 1 out of every 10 museum workers is afraid that they're about to lose their job. That's just enormous. And I think we'll see that in many other sectors. As you know, and as we'll hear later today about the role of the nonprofit world, nonprofits employ 1 out of every 10 people in America. So it's incredibly important, not just for the work they do, but for our job force, that we keep them working and able to do things. And that's why all of the efforts that you put in as volunteers, as professionals, is so vital. I think the other thing that obviously is quite important to keep in mind is that no matter how generous all Americans are, and they have been, and I'll talk about that in a sec, this is such an enormous disaster that we also need government resources to be able to help nonprofits in many ways. And already we've seen some progress, but we're going to need to keep our eye on that as well as on private philanthropy. The thing that has given us the greatest hope watching nonprofits is to see how innovative nonprofits have become. Almost every nonprofit had to, within 2 weeks, go completely digital, figure out how to do their work, what kinds of things they could do. And we've been talking to a lot of them for the cover story that is coming out next week. And almost all of them said, you know, we didn't really have a plan for this, but we just did it and we figured out how to do it and we innovated and collaborated and made it happen. And now in these weeks, they're trying to figure out what parts will stick, what parts are working well, and how to do it. But it was really amazing to see how quickly that digital transformation came on. The thing that many people have said is that collaboration among nonprofits, among workers working remotely, is better than ever. So that's one of the things that's given people strength in their organizations to feel like, while we are remote, we actually are quite connected. The response from Americans has been really generous. More than $10 billion has been contributed worldwide. Some of that has been contributed by the very wealthiest Americans. You've probably seen that Jack Dorsey has committed $1 billion. So we're seeing those phenomenal gifts, but we're also seeing lots of everyday contributions. Some things that people have organized among themselves are, you know, to give the money that they save on coffee or commuting or all those office expenses that we have and giving them to their favorite charity. So we're seeing contributions from people at all levels. One of the real explosions we've seen is in the number of gifts from donor advised funds. Some of you may know those are those sort of charity checking accounts where people have been putting lots of money in and a lot of money is going out the door very, very quickly. So the fact that we're seeing all of this commitment is incredibly important. Foundations are also changing their ways. One of the things that I think we're seeing is new flexibility, new generosity, talking about increasing donations in pretty significant ways. And that's really important because many foundation endowments have been hit very hard by the stock market. So it's an even bigger commitment for them to say that they're increasing giving. And we're certainly seeing a lot of that effort. There's a move afoot among some millionaires to say, please force us to give more of our assets away. And we'll see how that goes, but it's really an extraordinary, extraordinary time. One of the things that we've also seen is new efforts to encourage people to volunteer. And you might have seen a new site that debuted a couple of weeks ago when Giving Tuesday Now happened. It's called Power Of, and it's funded by the Gates Foundation and run by a group of nonprofits that's really trying to encourage people to give, to volunteer, to figure out how they can best help one another. Because that's the question I get most often from people is, how can I help? Directing them to websites like that will help people answer that question. One of the things that we have heard from donors is how committed those who care deeply about their organizations are. Some of them are increasing the amount that they're giving. And it is the very wealthiest Americans who are able at this point, if they're not worried about losing their jobs or income, that are supporting groups very generously. One of the things that I think is important to see is all of the new virtual fundraising efforts that people are undertaking. Some donors say they're really happy not to have to go to a gala anymore and instead to join, like we are all gathering here on Zoom, and not have to get dressed up and do it. And many fundraisers say that they've had great quality of interaction with their donors. People are at home now, they're not traveling, they're not doing all the things they could do, and they want to get involved in their community and have in-depth conversations with fundraisers, nonprofit executives, and others to talk about the ways that they can do good. So this is not a time to shy away, it's a time to engage, to talk, to build those bonds. One of the other things that we've seen is that trust in nonprofits is on the rise. Some of you may have seen that in past years, we've had a real faltering in the confidence in nonprofits. They haven't been doing as well compared to businesses and others. And that really caused a moment of reflection among many nonprofit leaders. But in this crisis, as people have seen nonprofits jumping in, doing things that matter, have been frustrated by some of the things they see governments doing, they have great faith in nonprofits. So one of the things that we're certainly expecting to see going forward is that people will do what they can to help nonprofits. What's important now to think about is how we can empower nonprofits to both survive this crisis, to have the resources that they need, and to be able to engage them in discussions about how we build a better normal as we come back. Nonprofits and foundations have the voice of the community at heart, and that's what they care most about. So the more we can do to engage them in thinking about what the community needs and what we do best is important. Another vital thing to do is to think about the ways that lawmakers need to hear from board members and others about what kind of stimulus action would really help nonprofits. Many of you know that nonprofits gain victories like the charitable deduction for non-itemizers. Some small groups are having access to nonprofit loans, but many, many groups, especially those that have 500 or more workers, they don't have access to those loans. So they're asking Congress to think about the vital role that groups play in their community. You can get engaged in some of those efforts. If you're a board member, it's especially helpful to be able to learn what you can say to policymakers in your community and to tell businesses what they can do. One of the particular things that's helpful is giving skilled volunteers, people who can help with all those technology issues that nonprofits are going through. Think about the kinds of things that people on your staff can do to help. We're not in an age where we're doing, painting of fences anymore, river cleanups, but there's so much that people can do online. And so engaging employees to do more, getting folks involved, that will bring the community together and do much that is needed. So I encourage all of you to think about ways to get involved, to think about both the short term and the long term, and to continue to do the good work that you are all doing. We all count on it as a nation, and we thank you very much for your service. I look forward to your questions when we get to the Q&A spot, and thank you.
Oh, Stacy, thank you so much. We really appreciate your snapshot of the sector and the creative, innovative ways communities across the country are looking to the future. We like to say it's the new norm and we're going to be doing things a lot differently now. And you definitely validated that. Now we want to welcome Dr. Maria Echiva. She is the Assistant Director of Planning and Operations of the George M. Perez Metropolitan Center at FIU. For the past 10 years, Dr. Echiva has served as a subject matter expert in data analytics and behavioral research, as principal investigator or project manager on various economic development, social, and behavioral projects. She has led the research and compilation of our 2020 Miami-Dade Nonprofit Economic Report, and it is with great pleasure that we welcome Maria.
Thank you very much, Sherry. Hopefully, I'll be sharing a few slides. If we can put these on the screen. Let me just start saying that the 2020 economic impact of the nonprofit sector report highlights the important work of our community's nonprofit organizations and provides a big picture understanding of our county's nonprofit ecosystem. The idea for this report was the product of the work of the Greater Miami Chamber of Commerce Nonprofit Business Committee and Philanthropy Miami, with the generous support of many donors who supported it both financially as well as with guidance on the many topics that affect the nonprofit community. We started developing this report at the end of last year using the most current data at the time, but we do realize that COVID-19 is likely to change the nonprofit landscape, and we recognize there is a lot of uncertainty related to the operations, resources, and survival of many nonprofits in Miami. With the heightened need for many of them to just meet the basic needs of the population. But it is also important to acknowledge what the sector looked like before COVID-19. As we discuss in the report, Miami's nonprofits fulfilled and continue to fulfill many important needs of the community, and they will continue to be crucial for our well-being. COVID-19 did not make these needs disappear, but it did shift the focus of many nonprofits and increase their importance. To provide more timely information and understanding of the nonprofit sector over the last 3 weeks, we've also been collecting survey data that Christina will present in a little bit. Florida, as a state, has a lower number of nonprofits per capita than most other states. The nonprofit sector encompasses organizations that are defined as tax exempt under Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code. This includes both public charities and private foundations, as well as other nonprofits such as civic leagues, chambers of commerce, veterans organizations, etc. The report's primary focus is on the public charitable organizations. Public charities have an active program of fundraising and contributions from many sources, including the general public. They receive income from their activities, or actively function in supporting relationship to one or more existing public charities. Private foundations are also tax exempt, but they usually have a single major source of funding from a family or corporation and act as grant makers to other charitable organizations. And then the third category, non-charitable nonprofits, are all other tax exempt organizations that are not included in the 501c3 category. They're the ones that I just mentioned: business and civic leagues, community associations, real estate boards, labor organizations, recreational clubs, and others. Public charities account for the majority of all nonprofits. Miami-Dade's public charities are 83% of the total number of tax-exempt organizations, while the non-charitable nonprofits are only 7% and foundations are 9%. Charitable organizations are dispersed throughout the county, but their concentration varies depending on the core function of the organization. We mapped their location, and there seems to be a higher density of such organizations in the urban core, and specifically in areas where the need for social services is higher. For example, the higher poverty rates in certain areas is correlated with a higher concentration of public charities, which is unsurprising since most of these organizations provide direct services to low-income individuals and families. Only about 2,500 of the 501c3 organizations in Miami-Dade had reported revenues as of September 2019, when we collected this data. In other words, only about 1 out of 4 charities in Miami-Dade are active. The average revenues overall were about 5.9 million, but most of the organizations have revenues under $500,000. Our analysis again focused on the public charities reporting revenues, as they're the ones most likely to provide services and impact our community. Most of the revenues are concentrated in the health and education categories, which account for over 11 billion of the revenues of the charitable nonprofits. When we look at the types of organizations in these broad categories, higher education and hospital and health systems account for most of the revenues, about 54%. In fact, the largest of the organizations in the health and education sectors, Baptist Hospital and University of Miami, with combined revenue of about 4.4 billion, account for over a third of the charitable organization revenues. The third largest category includes human service organizations and accounts for approximately 10% of revenues. Human service nonprofits are the organizations that most people think of when they hear the word nonprofit or charitable nonprofit. They feed the hungry, assist crime victims and offenders, provide job training, house the homeless, act as advocates for children, and offer youth programs, among many other services that they provide to our community. A deeper understanding of the charitable organizations in Miami-Dade can be gleaned from comparisons with other areas, and especially by looking at changes in the number of organizations and their revenues. Again, the analysis shows that Miami-Dade's number of charitable nonprofits decreased over the last 10 years. However, the decrease in their number was accompanied by an increase in total and average revenues, quite significant increases. As we heard already, Americans and our local residents have been quite generous, and it shows in these increases in revenues. The data also shows points, the more current data. In these graphs, I show you full years, and the last one is 2018, was 2018 at the time of the report. But our 2019 data points to the continued decrease of the number of nonprofits and continued increase in their revenues. The number of 501c3 organizations as of September, as I mentioned earlier, was 2,472, with revenues of almost 14.5 billion. I already mentioned average revenues were just under 6 million. The extensive analysis of the characteristics of charitable organizations also allowed us to estimate the economic impact of the sector. In addition to providing services, goods, and resources to meet community needs, charitable organizations also have a measurable economic impact resulting from the employment they provide and the expenditures. Charitable organizations contribute by spending the resources for their programs, for wages, fundraising, and other functional expenses. The impact of these expenditures is multiplied through the circulation of the money in the economy as they buy from suppliers, pay their workforce, and as household earners from the sector in turn purchase goods and services. The multiplier effect in the nonprofit sector varies by classification of the nonprofit, with the largest multiplier for religious organizations, about 3, and the smallest for mutual benefit organizations, about 1.4. What this means is, for example, a multiplier of 3 means that for every dollar spent by an organization, an additional $2 are generated and circulated in the local economy, creating demand for services and jobs. So the almost 13 billion in total expenses of charitable organizations, including the almost 6 billion in wages, generates an additional over 10 billion for the local economy. Thus, the total impact of the sector is over 23 billion. Finally, I want to note some information from the interviews we conducted, again, prior to COVID-19. Even prior to the pandemic, the sector had significant challenges. We talked to about a dozen nonprofits, from large to small, in different types of functional areas. And from their perspective, they had the challenge of communicating their purpose and impact to funders. However, the nonprofits also acknowledge that there are opportunities for them to augment their impact through collaboration. And we certainly see that happening every day now. This thinking and intent is even more relevant as they rise to meet the new challenges. I will end with this note that I have been truly impressed, and our community is fortunate to have so many and such hardworking nonprofit organizations. And we collectively need to acknowledge their efforts, but also support their work as donors and volunteers. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm sure the report has been shared with you as well. It's also available on our site, along with the infographic, and we'll be publishing the detailed survey results in the upcoming weeks as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, and I want to also thank your team. Great work. Thank you so very much. Great report out. We now would like to welcome Christina Radama. She is a board leader at Philanthropy Miami, and prior to launching MK Consulting, which provides legal compliance and legal operations services primarily to higher education and nonprofits organizations, she served as the general counsel of FIU. Thank you for joining us today, Christina, to share the findings of the recent survey of the FIU Metropolitan Center and Miami-Dade County that you recently conducted. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Sherry, for that lovely introduction. I want to share with you the information about the Nonprofit Impact Survey that was conducted by the Jorge M. Perez Metropolitan Center in collaboration with Miami-Dade County. I'm waiting for the PowerPoint to load the next slide. Whoops. I think we skipped the first slide. So let me just share with you some of the information about the respondents to the survey. We had a great response rate. The information is very fresh. The survey just closed at the beginning of this week. We had 374 responses from locally based Miami-Dade County 501c3 organizations. So this information will give you a great feel for what is happening across the local community. In terms of background information about the respondents, we have a great mix of organizations that responded. The prior slide you saw explained a little bit about the different budgets the nonprofits had. And we also have a nice representation of missions, from human services to education to arts, culture, and humanities. The slide in front of you now is really the heart of my presentation, and it speaks to the overall impact to operations and services of the not-for-profit community. And what we see here is a tremendous pivot by our very resilient nonprofit community to working remotely and to providing services to their clients virtually. Across the board, 71% reported working remotely. A very impressive number, 65%, have already pivoted to serving their clients virtually. An additional 39% have already added new programming, which they are providing in order to assist with COVID-19 awareness or to provide services. Unfortunately, the data, not surprisingly, when we have economic downturns, also reflects the funding challenges that are on the horizon for our nonprofits. 55% reported donations have already decreased significantly, and about half reported that they're going to have to cancel or already have canceled or postponed fundraising events, which are big revenue generators for our nonprofits. On the next slide, we also asked specifically, whoops, if we can go back to that last image, thank you. We also asked about layoffs and furloughs. As Maria indicated, nonprofits are substantial employers in our community. And at this point, 30% are indicating that they have engaged in layoffs or furloughs. 70% though have not. When we look through that data at the type of organizations affected, both in terms of the overall impact to operations and services, as well as these layoffs and furloughs, what we see for the time being at least is that it's really the arts, culture, and humanities sector that at this point has been highest hit or just hit. So if we can move to the next slide. What we also see in the data, which is very good news, is that our nonprofits have been quite industrious at getting some short-term assistance. Primarily that money has flowed through the CARES Act, the federal government aid that was released, both in terms of new grants that are available, as well as the Small Business Administration loan programs. 55% of the nonprofits that responded indicated that they had accessed or are trying to access PPP loans, which is a really significant number. Those PPP, Paycheck Protection Loans, are the ones that are forgivable, provided that they're used to pay employees and other types of expenses. Another good news in this information is that almost 10% have reported receiving new grants from foundations or other grantors, indicating that the foundations and other grantors are stepping up in this very tremendous time of need. We can move to the next slide. To a point that one of our earlier speakers made about needing to really focus on community needs at this time, we did also ask the nonprofits, what is it that you expect to be doing that you haven't been doing over the next 12 months? And unfortunately, 36% of those have indicated that they will be engaged in food distribution, and they had not been doing that previously, or they're needing to add services. I think that's a very difficult statistic that need to really meet some basic human needs in our community. They indicated that in order to help them provide for these additional community needs, there is a great need for operating funds. They, like the for-profit sector, pay rent, pay utilities. They indicated a need for technology, whether that be software or hardware, in connection with enabling greater virtual delivery of services. And then they also indicated a great need for PPE and cleaning supplies, because for many of them, they can't deliver services safely without those needed supplies. If we now move to the next slide, we asked this group of respondents to share with us their usual revenue sources. The information here is probably not surprising. These are the top 5 funding sources that respondents rely on. And I offer this only as background to sort of emphasize the point that other than maybe government grants and contracts, our nonprofits going forward are going to have potentially some difficult financial times. And if we move to the next slide, you can see what they are estimating for the rest of 2020 in terms of revenues. Most of them are reporting an expected loss. Interestingly enough, the over 20% have not yet calculated. That may be because they are busy providing services in this time of need, or with the uncertainty that we have right now, they may not have a clear picture to be able to even forecast. And again, as I indicated with the employment statistics, we do see the arts, culture, and humanities sector being the one suggesting the greatest level of negative revenue impact. So I want to leave you today with some images and stories that showcase the very good work of our local nonprofits, and also share with you information about some of the fundraising efforts being encouraged by the United Way and by the Miami Foundation. As has been said by many speakers, our quality of life in Miami-Dade County is tied to our nonprofit community, whether it be in the form of essential services like food and shelter, to running some of our most precious cultural institutions. So with that, with those images and those words, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to share this important information with you. I hope it's helpful, and I, like the prior speakers, would also like to say a very big thank you, whether you work for a nonprofit, donate your time or money to a nonprofit. I personally, and on behalf of Philanthropy Miami, want to thank you for working to improve the quality of life in Miami-Dade County.
Christina, thank you so very much. That was wonderful. And thank you for those images. That's a great way to end the report. I really do appreciate your summary. Thank you. Our great group of speakers, our next great group of speakers really need no introduction. This group of community leaders are key to the sector's work and success. Please help me welcome Stephanie Sylvester, the Chief Program Officer and Chief Information Officer for the Children's Trust, and she will introduce our panel. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Sherry. Good afternoon to everyone. I want to take the time to quickly introduce our panelist speakers. We have the Honorable Daniela Levine Cava, Miami-Dade County Commissioner, District 8. Philanthropic sector Representative Maria Alonso, who is the President and CEO of United Way of Miami-Dade. Pat Morris, Vice President, Community Affairs Officer, Wells Fargo. And it's really a pleasure to be working with them this afternoon. I have a long history of working with them. So what I'm going to do is, rather than introduce them, I'm going to first ask Commissioner Levine Cava if she could spend a minute or two introducing herself, and then we'll roll into Maria and finally Pat. So Commissioner Levine Cava, if you want to unmute yourself and do a quick 2-minute introduction. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much, Stephanie. What a fantastic program this has been. I've learned so much from all these great leaders. So I thought I would just do a quick overview, if this is the right time to do it, of what is the county doing, or do I do that in a minute, Stephanie?
If you want to do a quick intro of yourself, and if you have do half a minute of yourself, and then you can have a minute and a half on what the county is doing.
Okay, great. Well, I am County Commissioner. I'm a lawyer and a social worker, and I'm proud founder of the Nonprofit Business Committee once upon a time with Al Sanchez back in the day. So happy to see it doing so well under the current leadership, and these reports are fantastic. I was also part of the rollout of the last nonprofit sector report, and you know, it's amazing to have this data, and we know what an important sector it is. So that's a little bit about myself. I've been in office for 6 years. I'm a newly minted politician. Always I was the founder of Catalyst Miami. I ran the Guardian ad Litem program, the foster care system, worked at Legal Services, helping children specifically for many years, and proud to have that background. So now at the topic at hand, you know, nationally we've got a crisis, of course, a crisis humanitarian proportions. And just to give one fact, we've got 4 million people who were food deprived before, and now we've got 17 million food deprived. So that on top of the, you know, 33 million plus that have applied for unemployment, you know, we have an incredible tragedy unfolding. And many are families that have never received any kind of assistance. You see their faces in the food lines. I did a food distribution this morning. I'm doing them every week. Really, it's tragic. And so government obviously has a critical role to play. The federal government has stepped up and passed on to the counties. But I would say that the nonprofit sector is needed now more than ever. And just the one fact that Christina mentioned, that so many groups that have never done that kind of direct food assistance doing it, is proof positive of the adaptability, the responsiveness of the nonprofit sector. And good news is that the county government, Miami-Dade, did step up and forward advances to the approximately 150 nonprofits that received grants from general fund. About $15 million overall is in that pot. We've also supported farmers who were otherwise plowing their food into the ground. About 900 million worth of produce that's now being distributed through a network of nonprofits. Chief among them, Farm Share, feeding South Florida, but some of the smaller ones as well. COFO and Curly's House. So those are a few, and we're doing regular food distributions throughout the county. The county has also been very diligent in applying for federal dollars, and that will assist, and also pushing out, for example, the Paycheck Protection Program information that also could assist nonprofits, not just for-profits businesses. But at the end of the day, the main point I would like to make is that government cannot do it alone. business cannot do it alone. Nonprofit sector can't do it alone. It's really the three legs of our great democracy working together. And while I see us turning to the nonprofit sector, I don't yet see us having a true collaboration with the nonprofit sector to understand the needs of the community. We need a champion now more than we ever have. We need collaboration more than we've ever had. And I'm so happy that this conversation is happening now. And I call upon the nonprofit sector to speak up and let government and business know that you're here to help and what you need to be our hands and feet to get the job done. Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you, Daniela. Maria, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, if we can keep it to 2 minutes or less so that we can catch up back on some time. We have a number of really thought-provoking questions that we want to get answered today. Okay, thank you. Maria, if you want to unmute yourself and go ahead and do your introduction.
Can you hear me, Stephanie?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so good afternoon. It is great to see you and so many of my nonprofit colleagues on the chat group. Thank you for having me here today. I am a recovering former member of the private sector, so I'm for the last almost 3 years, I've now been in the public sector, but I think in all the roles that I've had throughout my career, I have seen that it does take all three of us working together, and you know, COVID, I think, has totally underscored and highlighted that for all of us. Stephanie, do you want me to just give some highlights now?
Sure. Yeah, quickly, if you want to. Yes, absolutely.
Sure. Okay, well, so as I was saying, I mean, COVID has created a global health and economic crisis that is testing all of us, and certainly the nonprofit sector is not exempt. The shocks of this new normal have been severe, and in our case, impacting a community where the majority of our households were already struggling to make ends meet and to keep up with the extraordinarily high cost of living versus our wages. So that was before COVID. So after COVID, those needs are exacerbated. So on the community front, what we've all witnessed is, and as there's been several references already, that there's been a need to access bare basics, such as food, such as assistance to pay rent, to buy medication, and other types of emergency relief. COVID has also isolated our most vulnerable in our community, and so many of our older adults and our elderly. On the nonprofit side, COVID has certainly created significant financial stressors for us and the ability for us to continue to provide services to meet our community's needs. It has impacted our fundraising revenue, as has been referenced several times, but should be underscored one more time, and is certainly driving the need for efficiencies and cutting costs. It has created a sense of urgency to meet the rising and evolving needs of our community. And the philanthropic sector has really been amazing. It has really stepped up to fill voids. It has and continues to fund research at a global level, as well as continue to provide support and flexibility to nonprofits so that we can move our essential work forward during this very critical time.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Do you want to just quickly wrap it up? Go ahead, Maria.
Yeah, no, honestly, I wanted to talk about collaboration. I wanted to talk about how
why don't we hold that? Let's do Pat introduce, and then because that's my first question on deck on what we're doing around collaboration. So go ahead, let's have Pat do a quick intro, and then we'll circle back with that question. Pat, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, I am unmuted. So Pat Morris, Community Affairs Office for Wells Fargo. And I just have a couple of comments to make on behalf of the business sector. First of all, I couldn't say it better than what Commissioner Danielle Levine said. If at any time in our history we needed a leader who understands all three sectors, now is that time. And I know she's one of our leaders who's giving that. So thank you very much, along with my colleague, Maria Alonso. Like most aspects of our new normal, corporate philanthropy is changing rapidly. The Boston College Center for Corporate Social Responsibility had a few statistics that I thought you would find interesting. A majority of corporations have increased corporate giving during the COVID-19 time. A majority of the companies reached out to have reached out directly to nonprofit partners to see what funding they needed, in many cases before the nonprofit reached out to them. A majority have eased restrictions on grants. I think that was one of the questions that might have been in the chat. And they've increasingly reduced any kind of restrictions around their funding and have provided programmatic dollars to now be general operating grants. They've shifted and expanded the focus of their areas. And I was very proud to hear that fewer than 10% of those surveyed by Boston College said that they stopped or slowed down their funding. I believe that corporate social responsibility, the trend that I've seen is that businesses have been urgently pursuing social causes and responding to events like COVID-19 much more assertively than ever before. They want to be there to meet community needs on the front lines. Urgency is more than being purely reactive. However, it is about aggressively going after the right causes. For some time, businesses have been looking to direct limited dollars strategically to emerging needs where they do the most good, while simultaneously aligning with the organization's missions and values. And I'll cut short some of what I was going to say, except for this. I do believe that there is a desire to make an impact quickly in our communities. Ultimately, not just doing good things, but doing the right kind of good things for our community. And I think that as we look at COVID-19, and I know I've talked to my business colleagues about this, we always knew the challenges in our community that have been there, but now there is a glaring light shining on them and us to solve those issues. And the one thing, if I don't talk again for the rest of the couple of minutes that we have, I do want to say to everybody on this call, we need to look at 5 years from now and understand what we want to be as a community for 5 years from now. And I think today we start building that future for us, along with not just the panelists, but everybody who's on this call. So Stephanie, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Pat. And I think that that's a good segue to go back to Maria and her comments around collaboration. And then I'm going to go back to Commissioner Levine Cava and have her also share her ideas about collaboration, since collaboration is her middle name. And then we'll come back and continue with the conversation. So Maria, you want to pick it up? Because I think that if we look to the future, just not putting words in your mouth, we can't get 5 years can't be rosy and fulfilling if we don't have collaboration in the picture. Go ahead, Maria.
No, absolutely. I think the way to frame it is that we are all stakeholders in the success of our community, right? And so if our community, if our working families cannot survive, we can't thrive. Our economy won't be successful, our businesses won't be successful, you and I won't be successful. And when we internalize that and we take ownership, then we get to what Pat was talking about, right? Which is the future is now. What is the future that we want for our community, and how can we all be a part of that? I've seen collaboration across the board, starting with volunteer activities, right? And there's been a score of, and more, right, that are needed. We launched earlier this year a community hub for volunteer activities called volunteermiami.org. And Pat Morris is very much a part of that. Thank you, Pat. And it's not just United Way volunteer opportunities, but opportunities across our nonprofit sector. And I've seen many of them play out during COVID, and I'm quite proud of them. And in fact, many of them have been virtual, which is part of reinventing ourselves, which is part of that innovation that Stacy was talking about during her opening remarks. And I, you know, Daniela, you've led many of with Farm Share, with Feeding South Florida. We've done them with Farm Share, Key Biscayne Community Foundation, certainly Miami-Dade County Public Schools in their food program to ensure that so many of our families that rely on their school meal as the only meal that their child is going to have for the day continue to have access to that even while schools have been closed. So that has been personally fulfilling to me. The fact that we've been able to have impact with virtual volunteer activities, whether it be reading to our toddlers so that we continue to nurture their desire and their skills, right, and passion for reading, or send a simple note of gratitude to all of those people in the front lines, not just our medical professionals, but also the people, the letter carriers, the people, the grocery store clerks, the first responders that have allowed our community to move forward, right, while we've been in lockdown for the last 12 weeks. So I'm inspired by all of that, and at the same token, realize that there's so much to be done.
Thank you, Maria. Daniela, you want to close up the comment around collaboration, and then we'll go to some questions from the audience?
Great. Yes, thank you. And thanks for the great responses from the panel members. You know, collaboration comes out in times of crisis because we're all focused on the same goal. So here we are, globally, we're all focused on dealing with this pandemic, reducing healthcare risk, of making sure that people survive it, making sure that they're economically able to survive it. And it's always so inspiring that at these moments that the best of human nature comes out. That having been said, I think we need to be in real active conversation with the stakeholders, like Maria said, all the stakeholders. And, you know, government had to jump into action, philanthropy jump into action. The Operation Helping Hand that United Way is leading is a great example of a collaboration. I want more collaboration. I want to see government inviting business, not just to talk about reopening, but how to reinvigorate the economy, how to reinvent ourselves. You know, as it was said by Pat, we have to look 5 years ahead. The economy is a new economy. The needs of people are, of course, always the same: food, jobs, housing, but in a new environment. So there are so many things that we have to think through, and we cannot do it unless we're all talking together. That's the wisdom of the crowd. And I do not yet see that happening. I would like to see government to have one person that is the czar, like where is the cavalry, to help lead the effort on the human needs, the human response, and the nonprofit sector obviously being, as I said before, the critical hands and feet for how we move forward. So I think that the opportunity is here in this crisis, the willingness is here, but the leadership is not yet here to really make sure that we're playing this long game. You know, like rent, like we got through, okay, now we're feeding people. If you have a car, you can drive through a food distribution line. If you can get through the unemployment online system, you can get unemployment, which so many have not been able to do. You know, we need to redeploy people for the new jobs. And so we need to support our nonprofits. As we just heard, what a key driver of job development are the nonprofits. So investment in nonprofits is not just charity, it is part of our booming economy. So I just think that collaboration is the way forward, and we need to challenge ourselves to make sure that everybody is at the table offering their best solutions, and that nonprofits, as always, help provide the conduit to the people and communities who might not themselves know how to have a voice. We need to bring them to the table too. Okay,
thank you, Daniela. I do want to pull a question off from the audience for Maria. Somebody wants to know what's the plan to update the ALICE report post COVID-19, and what is United Way's feeling that the estimate of Alice population will go above 60%. I don't know if you have any varying questions, some kind of comment around that, or if you feel that it's too soon to know.
Not a conclusive one. We actually have just received the 2018 data, which is the 2020 report. And, you know, it's really not about the numbers. I think what that Alice report provides is the backstory of why we're seeing the impacts that we've seen in Miami-Dade County. Again, you know, we just can't keep up, and the cost of essentials have so outgrown just the wages, right? And then when you look at the industries that are so important in our community, they've been at the forefront of impact, right? Hospitality, tourism. And so if is part of that collaboration and that conversation and that reinvigoration and that reimagining for ourselves in this community is to continue to press on that diversification of industry that we have here, not just so that we can attract more high-paying jobs, but also so that we're not so dependent. And when we get these hits, because these hits happen, I've never witnessed a pandemic before, I will honestly say that, but they happen. They happen. There are ebbs and flows in the economy. And if you're very concentrated in one or two industries, then clearly your community has more of an impact when those industries are impacted.
Thank you, Maria. There was a question going back to Stacy around how do you see, you mentioned in your presentation that the arts and culture subsector is getting impacted. What do you think that's going to have for the larger societal fallout, given that arts and culture is such a key component to calling us a civilized society?
Question for me, Stephanie, or for Stacy?
For Stacy.
Okay.
Is she still there? Or I know she might have left. I guess she's not there. Okay, well, moving right along. The other question for Maria Eschiva, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, Maria. What's the single biggest learning you've gleaned from your research for the economic impact report? Maria?
Hello again. Yes, I'm here. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
To me, the biggest surprise was one of the information that I presented on one of the slides about the recent changes in the sector, what we call consolidation, because we certainly see a very active nonprofit community. So because of their work, it feels like they're doing a lot and there is a lot more of them. But the fact that they're declining in numbers while at the same time their revenues is increasing is not necessarily a bad trend. Maybe they're becoming more specialized, more knowledgeable in what they do, and as a result of that, they can provide better services and produce a bigger impact. So that was the most surprising finding, which I'm saying not in a negative way, but as a positive development that will likely continue. Hopefully, with our support, they will continue producing this large impact.
Great, thank you, Maria. There is a question for Pat on how do you see, if you can provide a little bit more detail on what you're seeing in the corporate community and as it relates to giving. I know you mentioned that unlike the last time we had an economic fallout, corporate giving dried up. This time it seems to be continuing to go and maybe also have an uptick. Do you have a little bit more to add to that? You're on mute if you want to unmute yourself, Pat. Oh, where did we go? Did we lose? Hi, Pat. Do you want to unmute yourself? You need to unmute yourself. Okay, while Pat's figuring out, let's go back to Stacy. I see Stacy's back. Stacy, there was a question on the table about arts and culture, understanding that funding towards them has decreased. How do you see that? What do you think of that as an impact on the society at large, given that arts and culture is key to having a civil society?
That's a hugely important question, and I agree with the premise. I will say that in the Washington area, we have seen many of our arts institutions running creative fundraising campaigns and getting tremendous support. And I don't know what you're seeing there, but it really has been heartening to see how much people care about the arts and are giving generously in many ways, and recognizing that without ticket revenue, without visitors, and all of those kinds of things, that arts institutions need to find a new way. I also think that that's an area that has always benefited from private philanthropy in a very generous way. So I'm expecting that people will step up and talk about its value and its importance. And hopefully we'll see more giving coming from the entertainment industry. Sadly, sometimes we don't see as much generosity there as we see publicity. So I hope we can count on some of those folks to start giving even more generously and remind people of the value of the arts.
And just as a follow-up to that, Commissioner Levine Cava, how do you see the public sector playing a role in ensuring that our arts institutions don't go away?
Yeah, this is our economy. It's not, people don't just come here for the beach, which they do, and the weather and recreation. They also come here because we are this incredibly diverse cultural mecca, and arts and culture have become really one of our major selling points, not just for our locals, but for the visitors. I heard Bill Talbot talk about it for the Convention and Visitors Bureau, that we're essential workers, arts and culture here in Miami-Dade County. So I think it's incumbent upon the county to continue. We have a great cultural arts program. We've been continuing to support those nonprofits, and there is a monthly update from them as to the downturns they're experiencing, and we need to not be short-sighted. We need to maintain that commitment.
Great, thank you. Pat,
If I'm here, sorry.
I was going to say, do you want me to repeat the question, or do you have the question? Pat, where do we go? You just muted yourself again. Do you want to there we go.
I've got a ghost in my computer here, so sorry about that.
No worries. And do you want me to repeat the question, or do you have the question?
No, go ahead, please.
So the question is unlike in 2008 when we saw corporate giving dry up during that economic downfall, this time you've mentioned that there's corporate giving is maintaining, and some corporations are even increasing their giving, and so some wanted to know if you had a little bit more insight into why this is happening, and can we be optimistic as members of the nonprofit community?
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic, and there's some realities that we have to face. I mean, we all know who run nonprofits that one of the reasons why nonprofits are in the problem they're in only have 2, 3, 4 months of operating reserves, because a lot of the county and state and federal dollars don't permit the opportunity to use it for operational expenses. So that's something going forward, we need to address. Wells Fargo is focused on programmatic dollars, including, the credible ability for people to use the money to cover salaries. And so I think that's something going forward we have to learn coming out of here. Let's look at our own community. Wells Fargo is one of many banks, but look at the hospitality industry. That is a huge supporter of everything happening here. Look at the cruise industry, right? I mean, look at Carnival, look at Royal Caribbean, the beating they're taking. I mean, I don't think we can expect them, I'm not trying to be here to speak for them, but to be able to go forward, count on them, at least in the short term, to the extent that we have been. So I think we all gonna have to get more creative, get the right leaders elected who understand what we're all about at all levels of government, so that the response is really touching and having an impact on the nonprofit sector. I think the one thing that I picked up, and I'll just share this quickly, on a McKinsey study, a thing I was on the other day about innovation and crisis, 96% of executives in all industries across America said that COVID-19 will fundamentally change the way they will do business. And 96% said businesses will change the go-to-market strategy with a major focus on digital strategy and a digital focus. So, you know, look at our industries here and look at what they're going to need to be innovative. You know, it's going to be a challenge. Even the healthcare industry, the Baptists and the you know, all of the healthcare companies here they're taking a beating. I mean, they've got 3 months of no revenue. I mean, they've been major sponsors in the community. So I think they're going to be more strategic about who they fund, how they fund it. I don't think their generosity is going to stop. It's going to have to be more focused and more, you know, more strategic than probably has been in the past.
Thank you, Pat. So what I'm going to do one last question, and I believe that Pat, Stacy, Maria, and maybe Maria Alonso can answer this question. And if anybody else on the panel feels that they have the ability to answer the question, please jump in. So the question is, what's the best way or source to get wealthy individuals to help and help either fund or continue funding or increasing their funding to nonprofits? So Pat, since you have the floor, do you want to answer that? Then we're going to throw it over to Stacy and then Maria Alonso. And then
sure. I think, again, showing some of the weaknesses that have been in the nonprofit sector and some of the statistics that we saw in the two, the Maria and Christina's surveys. I mean, a lot of nonprofits have done a terrible job of building individual giving plans. And so they're going to have a hard time starting now. I think the ones that have started to build relationships, particularly with individuals, are going to have the ability to get focused on what they're doing and tell their story. I've told nonprofits from the beginning of this, during this time, everybody's looking at your newsletters. You know, I may have taken a quick look over a coffee. Now I'm reading every single one of them. And so if you're telling the story effectively, you're going to have a story to tell at the end of this, whenever that end is, to be able to, you know, get in front of the folks who you've started a relationship with already.
Thank you, Pat. Stacy, do you have anything to add to what Pat has said?
I think the critical, I completely agree with all of that. And I think what's also important is to show the impact of your work and the way you're doing things differently. These stories of people that are switching how they're doing their work, either to serve other kinds of people than they served before or to do things differently and better. Those are the kinds of things that will be powerful with major donors, and they need to hear about it. You can't assume that they know about it. You really need to reach out, tell their stories. And you know, one of the things we've heard is that people really enjoy phone calls at this point because, you know, they have had a lot of these Zoom conferences that we're all on right now. So really an old-fashioned phone call from a fundraiser for a chief executive at a nonprofit, that can do the world of good, and keep going back and building that bond. And even if they don't give right away, they will give generously as we emerge from this. It's incredibly important to think about relationships right now.
Thank you, Stacy. Maria Alonso, do you want to bring us home with your thoughts on this question?
No, I really was going to say that it's all about nurturing the relationships that you have, right? And sharing the impact and sharing, you know, some of the challenges and being honest, right? About where we are as a community, the impact that we've all had on our delivery models, on our business models, and at the end of the day, at whatever size contribution, it's about making that connection with the donor and connecting your work to their interests and continue to nurture that relationship. I did want to say that I think the philanthropic sector overall has really been phenomenal and has really tried to be very nimble. And I say this as I look at you, Stephanie, representing the Children's Trust, and so many like you and United Way that have continued to support the nonprofits that have reduced the expectations of it was a program grantee, it has become an unrestricted grant, right? And for that capacity building that Pat was talking about is so critical in moments like this, especially. They've advanced payment, right? Maybe payment schedules, because there's a realization that the need is real. And so rather than, you know, see someone go through, potentially go under, which is not what we want, that if there's things within your power that you are able to be flexible, I think those will be great learnings for our philanthropic community and our sector, right, going forward as a result of COVID.
Thank you, Maria. And so I'm just gonna, as the moderator, I'm gonna take one creative liberty and just acknowledge the board of directors for the Children's Trust. They have been supported in the Children's Trust directive of paying nonprofits for the last 3 months. And they have also been supportive of looking past COVID-19 and understanding that there's gonna be a mental health and economic fallout, and has invested to date an additional $1.2 million to help with family stabilization and with mental health issues. And then in addition to that, real-time assistance. We were part of United Way's Pandemic Fund. We've helped with the diaper bank, getting diapers. We've helped with foster care children, ensuring that they were able to get their basic needs met. So the Children's Trust fully believes in the community and is standing behind the nonprofits, and our board of directors and our executive team have been phenomenal during this period of time in ensuring that we do the right thing while being judicious with taxpayers' dollars. So with that said, I'm going to turn it back over to Alfred to close out the session. Thank you, all the panelists, and for your time.
Hey,
Alfred, go ahead.
Was somebody going to say something before I close out?
No, I just said thank you. I said go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. Listen, I want to thank all of you for joining our 8th Chamber Thursday Roundtable. I want to thank Stephanie, all the panelists, our other moderator, and also I really want to say how enlightening this conversation is and how important it's been. You know, as we repeatedly heard today, the nonprofit sector is critically important and in critical need. It's a need of our time. It's a need of our donations, our support. It's really, quite frankly, in need of new and revolutionary thinking. So I think it's time now for those out-of-box thinkers to join the ranks and help out. Absolutely no question in my mind, and it shouldn't be in anybody's, that ensuring the nonprofit sector's health will pay dividends in our own health. It's going to pay dividends in the education and well-being of our children, and in jobs for all those who have been left jobless. I want to direct you to please download the report. I'm going to share it right now on our site. Also, thank you to all of those who worked so hard for many, many months to produce this excellent report. I look forward to having this be something that we do annually. And lastly, if you're a nonprofit and you've been looking to apply for assistance, or you've gotten assistance like the PPP loan, and you're looking for how do you turn that loan into a grant and apply to the forgiveness program, and you need help, visit our site. I'm going to share that GMCC Cares is our new program that we've set up for those who are looking for it. I'm hoping that maybe somebody on the staff can share that the link to that site. Thank you again for joining us. As we continue to open our community and our businesses, please stay safe and be healthy. We look forward to seeing you at our next Chamber Thursday Roundtable. Thanks again.